The sun was shining brightly over Los Angeles, casting long shadows across the busy streets. Inside a tall glass building in the heart of Hollywood, the day was just beginning for the production company. The lobby was huge and filled with expensive furniture. It smelled like fresh coffee and polished floors. People were rushing everywhere. Some were holding phones to their ears, shouting about numbers and deadlines. Others were carrying stacks of papers, looking stressed and tired. It was a typical Tuesday morning in the movie business, loud, fast, and very serious. In the middle of all this chaos, the glass front door swung open. Keanu Reeves walked in. He did not look like a superstar who had starred in some of the biggest movies in history. He did not have a big entourage of bodyguards or assistants yelling at people to move out of the way. He was alone. He was wearing his usual simple clothes, a pair of dark jeans, a worn-out t-shirt, and a blazer that had seen better days. On his head, he wore a black baseball cap pulled down low over his eyes. He carried a backpack over one shoulder and a cup of coffee in his hand. To the busy people rushing past him, he looked just like anyone else. He looked like a guy who might be there to fix a copy machine or deliver a package. Keanu walked up to the large front desk. The receptionist was typing furiously on her computer. She didn't even look up. There was a line of visitors waiting to sign in, but Keanu didn't stand in it. He knew where he was going. He gave a small, polite nod to the woman at the desk, but she was too busy to notice the famous actor standing a few feet away from her. She just waved her hand vaguely toward the elevators, assuming he was an employee or a regular visitor. Keanu didn't mind. He liked being invisible. It gave him a sense of peace in a city that was usually obsessed with fame. He walked toward the elevators and pressed the button for the top floor. When the doors opened, the car was packed with people in suits. They were talking loudly about marketing budgets and release dates. Keanu squeezed into the back corner. He kept his head down and sipped his coffee. No one recognized him. They were too busy looking at themselves in the shiny metal walls of the elevator or checking their watches. When the doors opened on the executive floor, everyone rushed out, pushing to be first. Keanu waited for the crowd to clear before he stepped out slowly into the hallway. This floor was much quieter than the lobby. The walls were lined with movie posters and expensive art. The carpet was thick and soft, swallowing the sound of footsteps. Keanu walked confidently toward the end of the hall. His destination was a large corner office with his name on the door, or at least, it was the office he used whenever he was in town to work on his projects. He was there to meet with a writing team to discuss a new script he was passionate about. It was a project he was funding himself, which meant it was his building, his money, and his meeting, but as he got closer to the door, he stopped. He could hear voices inside. Loud voices. He frowned slightly. He checked his watch. He was exactly on time, maybe even a few minutes early. He reached for the handle, but he hesitated when he heard a man's voice booming from inside the room. No, no, no. That is not acceptable. I don't care about the budget. Get me the better location. The voice yelled. Keanu pulled his hand back. He didn't want to interrupt a heated conversation. He stepped back and looked around for an assistant. Usually someone would be there to greet him, but the hallway was empty. He spotted a young woman rushing past with a tray of water bottles. He gently stopped her and asked about the meeting. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, breathless. She didn't recognize him either. "We are having a scheduling emergency. The big studio executives arrived early and their meeting is running way over. They took over the corner office because it has the best view. We didn't have anywhere else to put them." Keanu looked at the door, then back at the stressed assistant. "Okay," he said softly. "Do you know when they will be done?" She shook her head, looking annoyed at the situation. "Honestly? It could be another hour. They are very demanding. You can wait in the general waiting area if you want, or come back later." Keanu thought about it for a second. He could easily open the door and walk in. It was his office, but he knew that would cause a scene. He didn't want to embarrass the assistant, and he didn't want to disturb the executives. He was just happy to have a few quiet moments to read. He hated confrontations. He preferred to go with the flow. "That's all right," Keanu said with a small smile. "I'll just wait here." The assistant looked surprised that he wasn't angry. She nodded quickly and rushed off to handle another crisis. Keanu turned around and walked back toward the main lobby area of the floor. There was a small seating area near the elevators with a few uncomfortable chairs. He sat down on a small plastic chair near a large potted plant. It wasn't a fancy seat. It was the kind of chair visitors sat on when they were waiting for a job interview. But Keanu didn't care. He took off his backpack and set it on the floor. Then he reached inside and pulled out a battered, dog-eared script. It was the project he was there to discuss. He opened it to the page he had bookmarked. The world around him was noisy. Phones were ringing, printers were whirring, and people were running back and forth. But as Keanu looked down at the words on the paper, he blocked it all out. He crossed one leg over the other and started to read, completely content to wait in his own office building while strangers used his room, unaware that the owner was sitting just outside the door. The heavy wooden door to the corner office finally swung open, breaking the quiet concentration in the hallway. A wave of loud, aggressive laughter spilled out into the space, shattering the calm atmosphere. Keanu kept his eyes on his script, but he paused his reading for a moment. A group of 5 people walked out, all dressed in expensive, tailored suits that looked stiff and uncomfortable. They were the studio executives, and they carried themselves like they owned the entire building. And the lead was a tall man with a red face and a loud voice. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, and he was shouting orders over his shoulder to someone still inside the room. He didn't look happy. Behind him, 4 other men and women followed, checking their phones and looking incredibly bored and important. They were the kind of people who believed that the busier they looked, the more important they must be. They walked right past the small waiting area where Keanu was sitting. At first, they didn't even notice him. They were too busy complaining about the terrible service and the uncomfortable chairs in the office they had just taken over. They spoke loudly, not caring who heard them. "This place is a mess," the lead executive grumbled, loosening his tie. "I can't believe we have to meet here. The air conditioning is too loud and the coffee tastes like dishwater. How does anyone work in this environment?" His colleagues nodded in agreement, muttering about how they should have held the meeting at their private club instead. They walked to the large floor-to-ceiling windows at the end of the hall to look at the view of the city. Leaving their bags and coats scattered on the floor and the empty chairs near the elevators, one of the younger executives, a woman holding a tablet, turned around and finally noticed Keanu sitting in the corner chair. She stopped and looked him up and down. She saw the worn-out jacket, the baseball cap, and the folded script in his hands. She didn't see a movie star. She saw someone who didn't belong in her world. She leaned over to the lead executive and whispered, loud enough for Keanu to hear, "Who is that? Is he a new driver? Or maybe a script reader waiting for an interview?" The lead executive turned and looked. His eyes narrowed as he stared at Keanu. He didn't recognize the face that was famous all over the world. To him, Keanu just looked like a regular guy taking up space. "Probably the assistant for the meeting," the lead man said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Or maybe he's the delivery guy." "Ignore him." He turned his back on Keanu and continued his conversation. "Anyway, like I was saying, this movie needs more explosions. Who cares about the dialogue? People want action. We need to tell this producer, whoever he is, that he needs to cut the budget on the story and spend more on special effects." Keanu heard every word. It was his movie they were talking about. It was his story they wanted to ruin with more explosions and less heart. But he didn't get angry. He didn't stand up and yell. He just raised an eyebrow slightly and turned the page of his script. He found it almost funny. Here were these people claiming to be experts, judging a project they didn't understand. And judging a person they didn't know, the executives began to pace around the small waiting area, treating it like their personal lounge. One of them threw his expensive coat over the back of the chair right next to Keanu, nearly hitting him in the face with the sleeve, without saying, "Excuse me," or even glancing at him. Another man started talking loudly on his phone. bragging about how much money he had made on his last deal. "I'm telling you, I'm the only one who knows how to handle this business," the man on the phone shouted, walking in circles just a few feet away from Keanu. "These actors are all the same. They think they are artists, but they are just employees. We tell them what to do, and they do it. If they don't like it, we replace them." Keanu kept reading. He was used to this. He had been in Hollywood for decades, and he had seen every kind of ego there was. He knew that the loudest people in the room were often the ones who were the most insecure. He felt a strange sense of peace sitting there while they ranted around him. They were stressing about money, power, and impressing each other. He was just thinking about the story and the characters. The lead executive seemed to get annoyed that there wasn't a waiter serving them drinks. He looked around the hall and spotted Keanu again. This time, he decided to assert his dominance. He walked over to where Keanu was sitting and stood directly in front of him, blocking the light. "Hey, you," the executive said, snapping his fingers. "Do you work here?" Keanu slowly looked up from his script. He met the executive's gaze with a calm, steady look. There was no fear in his eyes, just curiosity. "I'm waiting for a meeting," Keanu said softly. His voice was quiet but clear. "Well, you're in our way," the executive snapped. He pointed to the reception desk down the hall. "Go tell someone to get us some sparkling water. And find out when the owner of this building is going to show up. We've been waiting for 20 minutes, and it's disrespectful." The other executives snickered behind him. They thought it was hilarious to watch their boss order around what they thought was a random employee. "Disrespectful is an interesting word," Keanu said calmly. He didn't move from his chair. He didn't look intimidated. The executive's face turned a darker shade of red. He didn't like being answered back. He leaned in closer, trying to use his height to scare Keanu. "Listen, pal. I don't have time for your attitude. Just get the water and get out of here. We have important business to discuss, and we don't need peasants listening in." He spat the word peasants like it was a bad taste in his mouth. For a second, the hallway went silent. The other executives stopped checking their phones. The man on the phone ended his call. Everyone was watching to see how this peasant would react. Would he apologize? Would he run away? Keanu just looked at the executive for a long moment. There was no anger on his face, but there was a strength in his eyes that made the executive uncomfortable. Keanu was a man who had faced real tragedy and real pain in his life. He knew what was important in life, and he knew that rude people in expensive suits were not worth worrying about. Finally, Keanu closed his script gently and placed it on his lap. "I think the meeting will start soon," Keanu said simply. "You should probably get ready." The executive let out a loud, mocking laugh. He stood up straight and adjusted his cufflinks. "Get ready? I was born ready. This town is lucky to have me." He turned and walked back to his group, high-fiving one of his colleagues. "Did you hear that guy? He thinks he can tell me what to do." They all laughed, the sound echoing off the glass walls. They continued to talk about themselves, bragging about their expensive dinners, their cars, and their connections. They ignored Keanu completely, treating him like a piece of furniture. Keanu opened his script again. He smiled a tiny private smile. He went back to reading the story. He knew something they didn't. He knew that in just a few minutes, the reality of the situation was going to come crashing down on them. But until then, he was happy to be the fly on the wall, observing the comedy of errors playing out in front of him. The more they talked, the more they revealed how empty their lives really were. It was sad, in a way, but mostly it was just boring. He turned the page, lost in the world of his story, while the executives continued to shout over nothing. The waiting area felt smaller with every passing minute. The air in the hallway seemed to grow heavy and tense, filled not with actual danger, but with the thick, suffocating cloud of the executives' egos. Keanu sat quietly, his leg bouncing slightly to a silent rhythm only he could hear. He was deep in the second act of the script, fully focused on the dialogue between two characters. But the real-life drama happening just a few feet away was impossible to ignore completely. The lead executive was getting more agitated by the second. He had been pacing back and forth for so long that he had worn a mental path in the expensive carpet. He kept checking his watch, tapping his foot, and sighing loud, dramatic sighs that seemed intended to let the whole world know just how important his time was. He was a man who was used to getting exactly what he wanted, exactly when he wanted it. The fact that he had to wait for anyone, even for 5 minutes, was offensive to him. He stopped pacing and pulled a sleek, expensive phone from his pocket. He began to bark orders at the person on the other end, his voice echoing off the glass walls of the hallway. "I don't care about the contract," he shouted, walking aggressively in a circle around the small seating area. "Tell them if they don't lower the price, we walk. We are the only studio in town that can save this project. They need us more than we need them. Do you hear me?" He spun around on his heel and ended up standing directly in front of Keanu, blocking his light again. Keanu didn't look up. He simply turned the page of his script, his face calm and unreadable. The executive looked down at the top of Keanu's baseball cap and sneered. He seemed to take personal offense that Keanu wasn't reacting to his power. He wanted the man in the chair to be impressed, or at least scared. Instead, Keanu was just reading. The executive reached into his pocket and pulled out a protein bar wrapper. He unwrapped it quickly, taking a large bite while still glaring at Keanu as if challenging him to say something. Keanu ignored him, his eyes scanning the lines of the page. With his mouth full, the executive looked around for a trash can. Seeing none right next to him, he made a decision. He crumpled the wrapper into a tight ball and tossed it casually toward the small wastebasket near the elevators. He didn't even aim properly. The ball hit the rim of the basket and bounced off, rolling across the carpet and stopping right against the toe of Keanu's boot. The silence in the hallway was sudden and sharp. The other executives, who had been murmuring among themselves, stopped to watch. They all looked at the trash on the floor, then at the man in the chair, and finally at the lead executive. In the corporate world, this was a power move. It was a test. It was a way of saying, "You are beneath me, so you will pick up my garbage." The lead executive swallowed his food and crossed his arms. He stared at Keanu, waiting. He expected the assistant to jump up, apologize, and throw the wrapper away. He was used to people scrambling to please him. Keanu looked down at the crumpled wrapper resting on his shoe. He looked at the executive standing over him with a look of arrogant expectation. Then, very slowly, Keanu shifted his foot. He didn't pick up the trash. He just moved his boot so the wrapper wasn't touching it anymore. He went back to reading his script. The executive's face turned a dark shade of purple. He took a step closer, invading Keanu's personal space. "Are you deaf?" he asked, his voice low and threatening. "I think you dropped something." Keanu sighed quietly. He didn't want to fight. He didn't want to cause a scene. He just wanted to read his lines in peace. He realized that this man wasn't going to leave him alone unless he acknowledged him. Keanu closed his script and looked up. His eyes were tired but kind, even though he was being treated with zero respect. "I think that might be yours," Keanu said gently. The executive let out a harsh, humorless laugh. He looked at his colleagues. "Did you hear that? He thinks he's a comedian." He turned back to Keanu, leaning down so their faces were inches apart. "Listen to me, pal. In this town, you are nobody. You are sitting in a chair meant for important people, reading a paper that you probably won't understand. Pick up the trash and get out of my sight before I have security throw you out." The other executives snickered. They felt safe in their group. They felt powerful. They had no idea that the man they were bullying was the owner of the company and the star they were supposedly there to meet. Suddenly, one of the other executives, a woman holding a clipboard, spoke up. She was looking at her phone, scrolling through news. "Hey, remember that actor we're supposed to meet today? What's his name? Keanu Reeves? I heard he's really difficult sometimes. I heard he refuses to answer questions about his personal life." The lead executive rolled his eyes, turning his back on Keanu to join the conversation. "Oh, please. These actors are all the same. They are divas. They think because they can cry on camera, they are geniuses. I bet this Reeves guy is going to be a nightmare. He probably wants a private jet and a massage therapist just to show up." I read online that he's actually really nice, another executive chimed in, though he didn't sound convinced. People say he gives up his seats on the subway and stuff. That's just PR, the lead executive spat, waving his hand dismissively. Nobody is that nice. It's an act. He's probably just like us, but better at hiding it. Or maybe he's just stupid. You can't be that rich and that normal. It's not possible. He looked back at Keanu one last time, shaking his head. Unlike this guy is just rude. He pointed to the trash still on the floor. You know what? Forget it. You're not worth the effort. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a $100 bill, and dropped it on the floor next to the wrapper. There, that's for cleaning it up. Buy yourself something nice? The group laughed again, a cruel, hollow sound. It was the sound of people who had lost touch with reality. They thought money could buy manners. They thought it could buy respect. Keanu looked at the $100 bill lying on the dirty carpet next to the protein bar wrapper. He didn't feel anger. He just felt a deep sense of pity. He saw how empty these people were. They had everything, money, jobs, power, but they were miserable. They were so insecure that they had to pick on a stranger in a waiting room. Just to feel good about themselves, he didn't touch the money. He didn't touch the wrapper. He just looked at the executive with a calm, steady gaze that made the man shift uncomfortably. Then Keanu reopened his script. I'm good, thanks, Keanu said softly. Turning his attention back to the story, the executive huffed, annoyed that his power move had failed. He stomped over to the window, fuming. The hallway fell back into an uneasy silence, broken only by the sound of Keanu turning a page and the executives checking their watches. The tension was at its breaking point. The disrespect had reached its limit. It was only a matter of time before the bubble burst. Keanu waited patiently, knowing that the truth was just around the corner, ready to change everything. The sound of the elevator bell ringing at the end of the hallway broke the heavy tension like a glass breaking in a library. The door slid open and a young woman rushed out. She was Keanu's assistant. She looked frantic, her hair slightly messy and her face flushed with panic. She was carrying a tray of iced coffees and a stack of files, and she was walking so fast she almost tripped over her own heels. She was late and she knew it. In the world of high-budget productions, being late to a meeting with the boss was a terrible feeling. She was looking down at her phone, checking the time and muttering to herself about the terrible traffic on the freeway. Please be there, she whispered to herself. She turned the corner into the waiting area, expecting to find Keanu pacing or perhaps waiting in his car downstairs. Instead, she scanned the room and saw the group of executives standing by the window. She recognized them instantly. They were the studio heads who were supposed to be meeting Keanu later. She paused for a second, confused. Why were they out here? And where was Keanu? She looked past them toward the corner of the room. There, sitting on a small plastic chair, blending in with the potted plant, was Keanu. He had his legs crossed, his script open, and a half-empty cup of coffee on the floor next to his boot. The assistant froze. Her mouth dropped open slightly. She felt a sudden rush of guilt wash over her. She had left the star of the movie, the man who paid her salary, sitting in a public waiting area like a guest waiting for a dentist appointment. And right next to him was a crumpled-up candy wrapper and a $100 bill that she could see lying on the carpet. She rushed forward, ignoring the executives completely. The room seemed to hold its breath as she ran past the suits in their expensive clothes. Mr. Reeves, she gasped, stopping in front of him. Her voice was full of apology and distress. Oh my God, I am so sorry. The traffic was a nightmare, and then the elevator took forever. I cannot believe I left you waiting here. Keanu looked up from his script. He saw the panic in her eyes and immediately closed his notebook. He smiled a warm, reassuring smile. He didn't look angry. He looked like a friend who was just glad she made it safely. It's okay, Keanu said softly, standing up slowly. He stretched his back slightly after sitting for so long. Really, it's fine. I had some time to read. It was actually quite peaceful. He reached down and picked up his backpack, swinging it over one shoulder. The assistant was still shaking her head. No, it is not okay. This is embarrassing. I told security to let you into the private lounge immediately. And look at you sitting here in the hallway. This is totally my fault. I promise I will make it up to you. She was talking so fast and so loudly that the executives couldn't help but turn around. They had been ignoring her when she ran in, assuming she was another junior assistant rushing to serve them. But when they heard her call the man in the chair, Mr. Reeves, they all turned in unison. It was like a scene from a movie where the record scratches and everything stops. The lead executive, the one who had thrown the trash and yelled on the phone, slowly turned his head. He looked at the young woman, then he looked at the man standing up from the plastic chair, the man in the worn-out blazer, the man with the baseball cap, the man they had just called a peasant. It was Keanu Reeves. The realization didn't hit them all at once. It hit them in stages. First there was confusion. They looked at the face, trying to place it. Then they saw the calm eyes. Then they recognized the jawline. They looked at the script in his hand, the same project they were there to discuss. The color drained from the lead executive's face. He turned a shade of pale white that contrasted sharply with the angry red he had been just moments before. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He looked at the $100 bill still lying on the floor near Keanu's foot. And he wished the ground would just open up and swallow him whole. One of the other executives, a woman holding a tablet, dropped her pen. It clattered loudly on the floor, but nobody moved to pick it up. Keanu didn't look at them immediately. He was still talking to his assistant. He gently took the tray of coffees from her hands to help her out. Don't worry about it, Keanu told her, his voice kind and steady. The office is free now? Is that what you said? Yes, it's ready, the assistant stammered, glancing nervously at the group of stunned executives. She realized now why they were standing in the hallway looking so arrogant. They had kicked Keanu out of his own office. Keanu finally turned to look at the group. He adjusted his backpack strap. He didn't have a smirk on his face. He didn't look triumphant. He just looked at them with a polite nod. He was treating them with the same respect he would show anyone, even after they had treated him like dirt. Gentlemen, Keanu said, nodding his head slightly. Man. The lead executive swallowed hard. His throat felt dry. He tried to find his voice, but he was paralyzed by the awkwardness. He had just spent the last 20 minutes bragging about how he was going to fire the producer and yelling at the nobody in the chair, and that nobody was Keanu Reeves. The producer, the owner, the boss, Mr. Reeves, the executive choked out. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of disbelief. We didn't realize you were... He stopped talking because he knew anything he said would make it worse. If he apologized now, it would admit he had judged him. If he made an excuse, it would sound weak. Keanu looked at the $100 bill on the floor, then back at the executive. There was a moment of silence where everyone held their breath. Was he going to yell? Was he going to kick them out of the building? Instead, Keanu just offered a small, understanding shrug. It happens, Keanu said simply. I don't really look the part today, I guess. It was a humble joke. He was giving them a way out. He was letting them save face, even though they didn't deserve it. The assistant stepped in, sensing the extreme tension. She was angry at the executives for what they had clearly done, but she remained professional. Mr. Reeves, if you're ready, we can go into the office now. The writers are waiting on the video call. Right, Keanu said. He turned to his assistant. Let's go. He didn't say another word to the executives. He didn't demand an apology. He didn't even point out the trash they had left on the floor. He just turned his back and walked toward the door with the frosted glass, the office that had his name on the door. As he walked away, the hallway remained dead silent. The executives stood like statues, watching him go. The power dynamic had flipped completely in less than a minute. The man they thought had no power was the only person in the room who mattered. And the people who thought they were kings were left standing in the hallway, feeling smaller than they ever had in their lives. Keanu opened the door to his office, held it open for his assistant, and stepped inside, closing the door on the most awkward moment of their careers. The heavy click of the office door latch echoed like a gunshot in the silent hallway. For a long moment, nobody moved. The air in the corridor felt thick and heavy, making it hard to breathe. The 5 executives stood frozen in their expensive suits, staring at the closed door that separated them from the man they had just mocked. The $100 bill still lay on the carpet, a sad symbol of their arrogance. The crumpled wrapper sat next to it. Just a few minutes ago, these items were tools they used to feel powerful. Now, they looked like trash on the floor of a building owned by the very man they had tried to bully. The lead executive felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He looked at his colleagues. Their faces were pale. The woman with the tablet was clutching it tightly against her chest, as if it could protect her from the humiliation. The man who had bragged on the phone was looking down at his shoes, unable to make eye contact with anyone. Did that just happen? One of them whispered, his voice trembling slightly. The lead executive swallowed hard. His throat felt like it was full of sand. He looked back at the door. He realized now that Keanu Reeves hadn't said a word to defend himself because he didn't need to. Keanu knew who he was. He knew he owned the building. He knew he was the one in charge. The executives were the only ones who were confused. "We have to go in there," the lead executive said, though he didn't sound convinced. "We have to apologize. We have to explain." "And say what?" Another executive snapped, his voice low and filled with panic. "That we treated him like a servant. That we threw money at him like he was a beggar. Do you think he cares about an apology? He owns the project. He could fire us right now and blacklist us from the industry." The reality of their situation sank in. They weren't just rude to a stranger. They had insulted one of the most powerful and respected figures in Hollywood. The story of what they did would get out. People would laugh at them. No one would want to work with them. They couldn't go into that office. Facing Keanu Reeves now, after what they had done, was impossible. The shame was too great. "We should just go," the lead executive said quietly. "We should just leave." "But what about the meeting?" a younger executive asked. "The meeting is over," the lead executive said, his voice defeated. "We lost." He finally bent down and reached for the $100 bill. His hand shook slightly as he grabbed the trash and the money, shoving them both into his pocket. It was a small act of cleanup, but it felt like admitting total defeat. Meanwhile, inside the quiet office, the atmosphere was completely different. The room was large and bright, filled with comfortable furniture and shelves lined with scripts and movie memorabilia. It was a space designed for creativity, not conflict. Keanu walked over to his desk and placed his worn backpack gently on the chair. He didn't look angry. He didn't look like a man who had just been insulted. He looked like a man who was happy to be off his feet and back in his own space. His assistant was still standing near the door, looking flustered. "Mr. Reeves, I am so sorry about them," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "I heard what they said when I came in. I can't believe they treated you that way. I should have thrown them out myself. I can call security and have them banned from the building right now if you want." Keanu looked at her. He smiled warmly. It was the same smile he had given her when she apologized for being late. It was a smile that said everything was going to be okay. "It's all right," he said softly. "Really, don't worry about them." "But they were terrible," she insisted. "They were in your office, drinking your coffee, acting like they owned the place. And then they treated you like you didn't exist." Keanu walked over to a small table where water bottles were set up. He picked one up and offered it to her. "People get strange when they are stressed," Keanu said, his tone thoughtful. "They weren't mad at me. They were just mad at the world, and I happened to be sitting there. It happens." He took a sip of water and leaned against the edge of his desk. "Besides, maybe it was a good thing. It gave me a chance to read the script without any interruptions. The scene in the second act is much stronger now that I've read it twice. That's what we should focus on. The work, the story, not the egos." The assistant looked at him in amazement. She had worked in Hollywood for a long time. She was used to actors screaming about trailer sizes and producers yelling about budgets. But Keanu was different. He was genuinely kind. He had every right to be furious. He could have humiliated them, shouted at them, or had them fired. But he chose to let it go. He chose to be kind instead of right. It was a lesson in humility that she would never forget. "You're a good man, Keanu," she said quietly. He just shrugged as if it was no big deal. "Okay, let's get to work. We have a movie to make." Outside in the hallway, the executives were gathering their things. They moved slowly, like they were walking through a nightmare. They didn't speak to each other. They didn't check their phones. They just wanted to escape. They walked to the elevator and pressed the button. When the doors opened, they stepped inside, grateful to be alone. As the elevator carried them down to the lobby, they felt the weight of the morning pressing down on them. They thought about the man in the worn-out blazer. They realized that while they had the fancy suits and the loud voices, he had something they would never have, class. When they walked out of the building and into the bright Los Angeles sunshine, the city looked different. It felt bigger, and they felt smaller. They got into their expensive cars and drove away, leaving the $100 bill crumpled in the trash back at the office dot up on the top floor. Keanu Reeves sat behind his desk, reading the script. He was alone with the characters, focused on the art. The chaos of the morning was gone. He didn't care about the executives, and he didn't care about their status. He was just happy to be doing what he loved, treating everyone with respect, and staying true to himself. And in that moment, that was worth more than all the money or power in Hollywood.